You know, some people are remembered for their brilliant lives, their incredible inventions, or their world-changing ideas. And then there are the people remembered for how they left. We're about to dive into some of history's most spectacularly unfortunate, ironic, and just downright bizarre final chapters.
I mean, we've all been there, right? You spill coffee on your shirt, you miss your train, you get stuck in the rain. It feels like the absolute end of the world. But as we're about to see, a really bad day in history, that could literally be your last day. Yep, we're going to meet a few historical figures whose final day was so profoundly ironic, it kind of ended up rewriting their entire legacy.
Okay, first up, let's travel back to 17th century France. We're going to meet a man named François Vatel, a master of hospitality whose obsession with getting every single detail right led to a truly tragic end.
Now, a lot of people think that Vatel was a chef. Nope, he was the maître d'hôtel. Think of him as the high-stakes event planner for royalty. It's like being in customer service, but if your customers aren't happy, they could literally throw you in a dungeon. That was his entire world.
So what was the big event? Well, Vatel had to organize this massive 3-day banquet for King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. The guest list was supposed to be a cool 3,000 of the most powerful people in Europe. Oh, and his timeline? He had just 2 weeks to get it all done. No pressure, right? As you can probably guess, things started to go wrong almost immediately. First, double the number of guests showed up, 6,000 people. Then the huge fireworks display he'd planned got rained out. Now, for a perfectionist like Vatel, these were major blows. But the real breaking point, the thing that pushed him over the edge, came on day 2 with the main course. So, the fish delivery for the morning's meal, it just didn't show up on time, and Vatel completely spiraled. He felt he had dishonored his host, that he'd failed the king. In his mind, this wasn't just a little mistake. It was an unforgivable catastrophe, a stain on his name that he just could not live with. Convinced that he was a total failure, Vatel took his own life. And here's the unbelievable tragic irony of it all. The rest of the fish, the very thing that caused him so much shame, showed up just moments after he died. He chose a permanent solution for a problem that had already solved itself. All right, our next story takes us into the early 20th century, where we meet Isadora Duncan. She was a revolutionary dancer whose life was just a series of tragedies, and it was all capped off by one of the most bizarre deaths you can possibly imagine. I mean, Isadora Duncan's life was just relentlessly tragic. It started with her father's financial disgrace, and then the unimaginable horror of losing her children. She lost one just after he was born, and her other 2 drowned when their car tragically rolled into the river Seine. Her whole life was just defined by loss.
And her death was just as sudden and tragic. On September 14th, 1927, she was getting into an open-top car. As the car pulled away, her signature long silk scarf, this beautiful thing that was so much a part of her artistic style, flew back and got caught in the rear wheel. The scarf tightened instantly. It snapped her neck. The very symbol of her art became the instrument of her death.
And for our last story, we're heading to the 16th century to meet a true man of science, the brilliant astronomer Tycho Brahe, who basically proved that sometimes having really good manners can be fatal.
Make no mistake, Tycho was a giant in his field. He painstakingly charted hundreds of stars before the telescope was even a thing, and he mentored the great Johannes Kepler. But for all his scientific genius, his legacy is now forever tangled up with the incredibly undignified way he died. See, his downfall came down to a really simple but brutally strict rule of etiquette. Back in 1601, he was at this royal banquet in Prague, and he desperately needed to use the bathroom. But to leave the table before your host, that was a massive, unthinkable insult. You just didn't do it. And he chose manners over biology. Tycho refused to get up. He held it in for the entire dinner. This one decision led to an agonizing 11 days where he was physically unable to go, which resulted in a ruptured bladder and ultimately his death. All completely avoidable for one of history's greatest minds.
So, you've got a perfectionist, a dancer, and an astronomer. 3 completely different lives, but each of their stories is tied together by this cruel, almost unbelievable thread of irony.
Let's just recap the sheer irony here. You've got Vatel, who died over a problem that had already fixed itself. You have Isadora Duncan, killed by the very fashion that defined her artistic freedom. And then there's Tycho Brahe, whose strict adherence to social grace led to a painful and, let's be honest, pretty graceless death.
And all this leaves us with a really fascinating question. These were people who led remarkable, groundbreaking lives, yet so often their legacies are defined by their final unlucky moments. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What truly shapes how history remembers us? A lifetime of brilliance or one really, really unfortunate exit?